right? So the next step in it is that Descartes says, number 5, he proves the existence of a perfect. Descartes proves the existence of a perfect God, right? Descartes goes about proving the existence of a perfect God. I'm not going to get into the proof on the existence of the proof of the existence of a perfect God. I'll leave you to read that in Descartes. Obviously, a lot of this is contingent on theistic belief, right? You have to be, in a sense, a theist to support the argument. And for me, it's just good enough to know that he had a manner in which he was justified. He felt that he answered, he felt that he addressed the needs of the evil genie. And since the evil genie would deceive us of all of the existence of the world, we then realize that there's this one thing that can't be deceived. However, we don't have reality. We can't have reality in order to function in our day-to-day lives, because everything else would be called into question, right? We'd be bumbling, fumbling fools. So what Descartes' argument actually needs is an all-perfect God who would not allow for the existence of the evil genie. As soon as Descartes introduces the perfection of God, he's able to reintroduce the truths of mathematics. And after the truths of mathematics have been introduced, he can reintroduce the external world. Right? So we in a sense, reduced the external world, removed all of the perceptual flaws from the external world, arrived at the cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. We got rid of the evil genie through the perfection of God. Through God's perfection, we can rest assured that the truths of mathematics, and I mean Descartes was a tier 1 mathematician as well. He knew what he was doing with respect to math. There was a lot of substance to his knowledge, a lot of breadth to Descartes' knowledge. We can rest assured that the truths of mathematics are sound. And once we rest assured that the truths of mathematics are sound, we can rest assured to the existence of the external world. So it's not that he questions the external world at all. He believes that the external world exists. However, there's a fundamental problem that still exists in his argument, right? And he was in correspondence with Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, right? And Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, as a very sort of old version of feminism, was one of the first to critique, as a woman, as a princess, right? To critique Descartes, right? And Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, through a series of letters, and I don't know if I still have that book. Let me see if I have that book. I had a book. Yeah, I don't think I had a book. I don't think I... Oh no, here it is. Ah, I have the book. Alright, so I wasn't planning on doing this, but I'll do it. If I can find it. Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, through a series of correspondence that she had with Descartes, she challenges him. I actually found it, right? So this is Elizabeth to Descartes, right? Princess Elizabeth to Descartes. She says to herself. So first, let's erase this so that we can have an understanding of Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia's critique, right? Princess Elizabeth says, and I'm reading now, she says in a letter to Descartes, she says, "I beseech you, tell me how the soul of a man," right? Tell me how the mind, the mind, how the soul of a man, since it is but a thinking substance, can determine the spirit of the body. How can the mind, right? How can the mind determine the body? B-O-D-Y, right? How can the mind determine the spirit of the body to produce voluntary action? How can I think about something, and because of my thought, since we're classifying the mind as being immaterial, and I'm going to shortly do a separation between the mind and the body, produce voluntary action within physical substance, within physical things. For it seems every determination of movement happens from an impulsion of the thing moved. Okay? Contact is required for the first two conditions and extension for the third. Contact seems to me incompatible with an immaterial thing. That's the key point, right? And that's basically your critique. So Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, and this is a book on women philosophers of the early modern period. Margaret Atherton, I probably butchered her name, Margaret Atherton edited it, right? Very good book. And she talks about Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia's critique of Descartes, what's known as Cartesian dualism, right? So that there is an actual term for this, right? It's called Cartesian dualism, right? And Cartesian dualism results from the separation, the idea that there's a separation between the mind and the body. And Princess, a very intelligent woman, Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia was one of the first people to actually critique Descartes on this point, right? Descartes, I remember in your reduction you talked about the fallibility of the body, and you arrived at the mind, the Cogito, as being infallible. But how is it that the mind, which is an immaterial substance, an immaterial thing, how can it affect the body, right? How can it influence matter? Every time I've ever looked at anything in the world, if two billiard balls collide, it's the impact of one ball that causes the other to go, right? How is it that something that doesn't have any physical substance, how can that cause something to move, right? Hence the problem of Cartesian dualism, or what's known as the mind-body problem. Now, philosophers, almost all, not all, but almost all philosophers, I'd say a good 95% of philosophers have done away with trying to solve the mind-body problem, right? There are still some philosophers who are trying to solve the mind-body problem, but for the most part, it's a problem that the vast majority of philosophers have done away with, right? Because we've chosen sides. So, what are some of the conditions of mind? Well, mind is immaterial, says the argument, while the body is obviously material. Okay, so that's the first condition. The second is that the mind is what's known as non-extended. Right, the mind is non-extended. It's thought. And the body is obviously extended. Extension refers to the ability to occupy space, right? The ability to have sort of shape, right? So, right? Okay. So, the mind is immaterial, the body is material. The mind is non-extended, it doesn't occupy space, it doesn't have shape. The body is extended, it occupies space, it has shape. Number 3, no particular order. The mind is mental, obviously. The body is physical. Number 4. The mind is, this is very important, put a star by for it. The mind is subjective. The body is objective. Right? The mind seems to be subjective, right? It seems to be the case that, well, if I'm using the mind, sort of a critique against Descartes, if I'm using the mind to access the truths of reality, well, it's my particular mind, right, that's accessing the truths of the reality. How can I know for certain that I've accessed something that actually is, right, that exists independent to my perception of its existence, right? It's a hard claim to respond to, right? It's not until many, many, many years later, and lots of philosophical arguments from Spinoza to Berkeley to Hume to Kant that we finally get some approximation of an answer to that question, right? It's not an easy question to answer. The next point, which is probably even more important than subjectivity, is what's known as indivisibility. I-N-D-I-V-I-S-I-B-L-I-T-Y versus divisibility. D-I-V-I-S-I-B-L-I-T-Y. Divisibility means that it can be sort of deconstructed. It can be broken into parts, right? So from one piece, I can take this piece and sort of split it down the middle, and I can have like one half, and I can have the other half, right? But then I can take those halves and I can break those halves down into their separate component parts, and so on and so on and so on.